Brandon Sanderson did not become famous because of Way of Kings and Mistborn. He did because of this book. I know why Brandon Sanderson rose to fame. It's not due to Mistborn. It's not due to Way of Kings. It's because of this epic fantasy series that Brandon Sanderson was a fantasy fan of for way before he started writing. And of course, I'm talking about The Wheel of Time. Now, I've been a fantasy fan for a long time. You know, when I was in high school, I read Lord of the Rings for the first time. And I read Lord of the Rings right before the movie adaptations. My older brother had read Fellowship of the Ring, and he said, it's absolutely amazing. You gotta try it. You gotta read this. And I did, and I was blown away. And it was like 6 months before the movie came out. And I'm so glad that I read it before I watched the movie, because there was so much in here that I wanted to picture myself. I got to picture the Balrog in my own imaginings of that scene in Moria. There's so much of it that you get to picture yourself when you are a reader. And Brandon Sanderson has mentioned this, that when he finishes a book, he's not really finishing it, because it's going to be finished when you read it and when the reader imagines all of the scenes. And it's one of the magic pieces of reading. So what was it about Lord of the Rings that was so magical? It's this magical story of friendship and hardship and found family and brotherhood and destroying something that should have never been created. Getting rid of that evil that should have never been there. And how can you go through that journey, and what burdens does it press on you? What burdens does it press on Frodo and the whole fellowship? The next epic fantasy series that I read was A Game of Thrones. I read this in community college, and again, my older brother was pushing me. He was like, hey, this is really great. You should read this. This is amazing. And lo and behold, it was just a little bit before the HBO adaptation. And I read A Song of Ice and Fire. I blew through it up until that point. At that point, A Game of Thrones, Clash of Kings, Storm of Swords, and Feast for Crows were out, and I blew through them before the TV series came out. And it was the same thing. I enjoyed so much all of the visualizations and all of the way that I was able to interpret the story in my own way before it was interpreted on the screen. And what is it about A Song of Ice and Fire and A Game of Thrones that are so great? Yes, there are magical elements, but it also grounds fantasy in this more realistic view of the way that human nature works, which is not so pretty. And George R. R. Martin based this on War of the Roses, and he was also a big Lord of the Rings fan, but he wanted to do something different. He wanted to be, tangential to Lord of the Rings. Now, if you notice, these two big epic fantasies, I read them before the film adaptation or before the TV adaptation. So a few years back, when I heard that Wheel of Time was going to be adapted by Amazon Prime, I picked it up. I bought even though it's a 14 book plus a prequel series, I picked it up and I started reading it in early 2022. It's 2026. It's taken me a while, but I just finished book 12 in the 14 book series. And while I still like Lord of the Rings and A Song of Ice and Fire better than Wheel of Time, this might be the best singular fantasy novel I've ever read. Why is that? That's a large claim. It has taken 12 books to get here. There's so much buildup. And I blasted through the first 4 books in this series. I thought that they were so fun. They were so interesting. It was an interesting take on the world. There were so many nuances to the story that I really loved. And there are parts of book 5 and book 6 that slowed down And Robert Jordan didn't write women the best, but they had great endings to those books. Fantastic events, wonderful story in general. Book 7 and Book 8 were interesting. Book 9 was interesting. I think his writing matured. He started writing women a little bit better. Book 10 was horrible. Absolutely horrible. One of the worst fantasy novels I've ever read. You know, Book 11 was great, but this book is epic. The journey that two of the main characters go on throughout this novel and the buildup that we've seen over the course of the 12 novels so far for these two characters, the payoff is phenomenal. To write these giant novels, it's also not easy to step into someone else's world and treat it with respect. That's why this novel is the reason that Brandon Sanderson is so big. So he had written Mistborn, and Mistborn is lovely. You know, I read Mistborn last year, and the leatherbound was on sale, so I went ahead and picked it up recently. But Mistborn was and is an excellent novel. Does Brandon Sanderson have the best writing? No. Does he tell great stories? Yes. He really pulls it together at the end. It has a great conclusion. There's very interesting ways that he uses different aspects of human nature that aren't typically used in fantasy literature. And I really appreciate that. And Mistborn has built this huge cult following, and I don't want to take away from what Mistborn is, but it's not why he's huge today. It's how well he executed in this book and the subsequent 2 books after this in Wheel of Time. I don't know how he did that, but I've heard that he did well. But this one was phenomenal. And he did follow it up. So this was published 2009, this was published 2010. He did follow it up with his own epic fantasy that was excellent. I loved Way of Kings. I thought that it was so much fun. Yeah, it's not the best writing per se, but it's a great story, a great ride, an easy read. Even though it is in this mass paperback, 1,200 pages, excellent, easy to read. But I just can't get over like some of the story arcs in here. I'm just gonna throw it out there. Okay, spoiler alert, spoiler alert. I'm gonna say it 3 times like it's Beetlejuice, spoiler alert. The way that Rand deals with all of the trauma that he's been in, and the way that you slowly watch him go insane and deal with that and try to refine himself, it's tragic and it's human, and it's like you're watching someone develop a mental illness while you're going through this whole book series. If this book series was only 3 books long, you would have the chosen one go from farm boy to powerful to, you know, chosen one that will save the world and destroy himself. And it would be this very standard 3-point arc, and that's it. And there's parts of this series that are hard to get through, but the fact that you went through all of that and you saw all of those nuances in the different ways that Rand was going that whole time make him so much more complex, so much more nuanced, and makes the payoff that much greater. So does Brandon Sanderson deserve like all of the greatness from this novel? No. I mean, he used Robert Jordan's notes after Robert Jordan's unfortunate passing. Robert Jordan's wife was the editor for all of Wheel of Time, and then was the editor, you know, who had employed Brandon Sanderson to finish off the series. But I am just flabbergasted at how well Brandon Sanderson executed in another person's story. So yeah, Mistborn is amazing. I loved it. A lot of people hype it up, but I really enjoyed it. And it's Brandon Sanderson's own work. Definitely deserves some of the hype that it gets. And Way of Kings, Stormlight Archive is very fun. It's an epic fantasy. It's his own world, his own creation, and he deserves all of the stuff that he gets from it. But the way that he took all of the Wheel of Time fans and converted them into Brandon Sanderson fans, that is amazing. So kudos to you, Brandon. I'm very impressed as a new Wheel of Time fan that has been reading over the past 4 years. Very impressed with the way that you handled Robert Jordan's legacy. And that's why this book is the reason that Brandon Sanderson is famous.